You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network. This is the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of Thunderquack Podcast Network, where anything can happen. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your butts. It's Thunderquack time!
Hello, and welcome back to the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of thunderquack.com, which you can get early every Tuesday over at patreon.com/thunderquack, just like our Patreon producers Brian Murowski and JJ Samuel. Or you can wait and get it late every Friday on podcast services across the galaxy. I'm one of your hosts, Amanda Conkin.
And I'm your guest host today, Ryan Caron, usually of the Riverdale Gang podcast.
Excellent. Welcome, Ryan. I'm sure people could tell from me doing the opening to the Thunderquack podcast that it's a little bit different here on Thunderquack today. So thank you for joining us. Ryan, Mike is being a wonderful husband and father, dealing with a sick kids and a sick wife at home. So asked if we could do a guest spot today. And Ryan is kind enough to join us. So thank you again, Ryan, for stepping in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Talking about nerdy things.
Yeah, and
when you called me, I was like, so what is it about? What are we talking about?
Yeah, and that's, I will say that everybody is like aware last week we threw out the rundown and then I had to bring it back so that Ryan had some structure into his day for this. And I know over at Riverdale you start podcasts a little differently. We don't really do land acknowledgements or haven't in the past, but I'm happy for you, I think, in the great tradition of Riverdale, bringing it into the Thunderquack podcast. Would you like to do a land acknowledgement for us, Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Amanda. And you and I are both in the same city. We're recording here on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And that's something we really try to make in every episode routine and protocol over the Riverdale Gang. We do talk a lot about, we're talking about one show particularly, that is filmed here on these same lands that we're recording our podcast on. And we talk a lot over there about how this territory does play an integral role in the filming. It's the entire set, the location, the place, the sense, the mountains in the background, the rivers, Sweetwater River over in Riverdale. Yeah, as well as being an important protocol that we sort of transferred over from our theater community norms. It also is, we think, really relevant to the show commentary of where these places are filmed and what that land and history and people are.
I feel like we probably should have been better about that on Quiver, because we were also, like, I mean, Arrow was also filmed here, too. Like, a lot of stuff happened in Vancouver. But I know, I feel like we've done some land acknowledgements every now and then, but I do like it. I appreciate that, like, you coming on, being like, hey, by the way, this is the thing that we do on our podcast, and always looking for, like, different things that we can slip in elsewhere as we need to.
Well, it's never evolving conversation, right? And I know what Chloe and I have found is that it really has opened up more conversations about the space, about the land, about the scenery. It's pushed us to think more critically about the commentary we're making. So we certainly found it to be a valuable touchstone.
Cool beans. Awesome. Well, thank you, Ryan. I'm so pleased for you to be here. And in great Thunderquack tradition, for bringing back things that we thought were once dead. I don't know if we've ever done that in great Thunderquack tradition, but I'm going to say that following the rundown, let's start with a little bit of news, because there was some unexpected sort of interesting stuff. Well, the rest of the world knew, but the Emmys happening this weekend was new to me because I didn't find out about them until they were happening and people were tweeting about all of the cool sort of groundbreaking things were happening. You don't really hear the Emmys described as groundbreaking, but sort of some bigger cool newsworthy
some happenings,
wins, right?
Some firsts and some seconds and some landmarks and some milestones. Yeah, that is my favorite way to process things like the Emmys is in the secondhand reactions of people whose work I already enjoy.
Yeah.
So I usually enjoy their opinions and reactions, and then I can read the summary of the Emmys of who won. I used to watch award shows, but these days it's not so much the type of entertainment that catches me.
That's fair. I mean, I never really watched Schitt's Creek. I know we've talked about it a lot on the podcast about how we want to watch it. And I mean, I've tried to watch a couple episodes, but that is, as a Canadian, how I found out about the Emmys happening was basically in all of those lead actors and supporting actors sweeping the comedy category, which is so exciting to see that happening, like Canadian talent getting recognized. One of the coolest things about the Emmys specifically is that, this year they got to accept the awards from their hometowns. Like, it was just that happened in Toronto. Like, they were there, they got to accept it, and so much of the Canadian talent as well recognized, like, with the actor category sweeping across. Of course, they also won, I'm pretty sure, at least from the brief research that I did, that they won the casting Emmy as well, right? So, like, the casting teams recognized for the great work that they did in populating the show with such amazing people. But also that Schitt's Creek has a cool... I mean, Dan Levy brought something really exciting to that show in terms of content. I think it's an important conversation, the types of things that he was able to put on the air and for us to just recognize and love, and there's a lot of things to love about Schitt's Creek, I think. So
yeah, well, it's
cool.
It's a landmark to have this queer icon of Canadian sort of the B-list art scene that we live in Canada, this sort of small bubble of really creative people operating this shadow culture here in Canada, who are also working these big careers and developments in America. And it's so neat to see this work that feels very, very of the Canadian zeitgeist, of the local production scene, popping big onto a U.S. awards show, and Dan Levy winning like 4 big awards, like setting a record of some sort as a writer, producer, actor, director, taking Emmys in all 4 categories. It's such a neat sweep to see for the Canadian art scene. Yeah, like you're saying, the artists, Watchmen, for example, some really, really important pieces of work in the last year. I'm happy to see these emerging artists and voices getting the acknowledgement for the work that they deserve. And everything that means in the Hollywood studio development circuit, as far as these people's careers, as far as the further telling of these tender romantic queer love comedies like Schitt's Creek, and these really important political speculative pieces, sci-fi pieces, genre pieces like Watchmen, getting that recognition,
which
so that we see more of it.
Yeah,
which same artists,
which we've talked about before, like on the podcast, that superhero shows don't really get recognized in awards categories, and that Watchmen sort of it's one of the first comic book adaptations to get sort of a top accolade. I think they won Best Limited Series, which is awesome. But also, we had actually chatted about this previously when Cannes Film Festival was canceled, and we did talk about that specific phenomenon about how there's so many artists that rely on festivals or award ceremonies or recognition in order to see like what it is they're doing, what people are pinging on, what the critics are enjoying in order to get additional funding. And I mean, again, if you're not any stranger to the Thunderquack podcast, you'll know that Mike and I chat a lot about how Canadian television is perhaps not funded in the same way that American television should, for better or for worse, right? We have a different funding structure up here, and a lot of the time there isn't the same amount of sort of funding given to get audiences for content. We put a lot of money up front to make stuff, and it's not necessarily things that people are going to want to watch and enjoy. I'm very critical of Canadian content, obviously, in this, but it's so cool to see something. And we've talked too about Kim's Convenience being another Canadian export as well, that's sort of getting some traction. So cool to see recognition, and for us to be able to have watching I didn't watch the Emmys because, again, I didn't know that they were happening. But going back and watching Jimmy Kimmel's opening, where he does sort of say, like, why are we doing this? Why are we having an award show in the middle of a pandemic? And obviously it's like leaning into that. It does look a little different. But that there needs to, sometimes you just need a little bit of joy through all the chaos to remind us why we're doing the things that we do. And especially for television, I mean, so many people have turned to television during this quarantine and people being at their homes, and like entertainment is still part of what people look to, and entertainment is a huge part of what shapes our culture and shapes our relationships to one another, and it's just cool to see that continuing to be recognized.
You know, there's also something to be said for making sure that the really important cultural conversations that this artwork has driven and dove into continues. Like, what's neat about some of these shows receiving accolades, even shows like The Good Place, which are nominated but didn't actually win all that much. We're seeing a lot of really cool philosophy questions. In Watchmen, we're seeing important questions of America's reckoning with its history of race, right, and violence and police. And in Schitt's Creek, again, it's this interesting benchmark of family identity and soft, gentle comedy. Zendayas win. Another landmark for young artists working.
Sorry, I've coughed in the middle of being excited for Zendaya because she's like the youngest woman to ever get the best actress in a drama series category, which is cool. And I think only the second woman of color to ever win that award as well. So there's some cool things.
There's a lot of things. Frozen 2. This isn't at all the Emmys, but Frozen 2 stood out for me of last year for being a little chunk of art that unabashedly jumped into despair as an experience in a way that I sure don't remember from my childhood media. And it got me looking at a lot of the really hit bits of art over the last year or 2 years. And I'm really seeing a lot of like, okay, how do we cope with the ridiculous stress of right now, really already bleeding into our art, as well as how did we get here and what are we going to do about it now? These questions are already percolating, and it would be a shame to not celebrate the work and the idea work and the creative work that has gotten us here, ready to dream of, revolution or whatever you're dreaming of.
Awesome.
And have these serious conversations about living through despair, living through crisis, grappling with the very specific hard questions that are contemporary.
Yeah. Cool. Speaking of hard things to deal with, I feel like the next piece of news, I'm sandwiching our news today. I feel like you need to start with a little bit of levity and you need to end with a little bit of levity, and in the middle we can talk about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
That was your levity. Despair Emmys.
Yeah,
was your levity.
Despair. Well, as much as you can be excited about anything right now, I feel like there's always a tinge of despair, even with all of the positive things.
Yes. Sorry, I think I spoke over you, Amanda. You're introducing our next subject.
Right.
The passing of Supreme Court Justice.
Yeah, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which makes me sad. But one of the big things is and again, you can't get away from Thunderquack without a little bit of politics talk. So I hope people are in for the ride. That is, Ryan and I talk a little bit of politics on Thunderquack, filling quite easily the gap left by Mike, where we often segue into politics. But we can't not talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg because it's such a big deal that the passing of one woman in America, the reaction wouldn't be first off to mourn or to be able to celebrate her life, but to really just feel scared for the future. And for people to be like, no, what does this mean? We're coming up so close to an election, regardless of what happens with the election, because if you want to look on some sort of bright side, and I know that Ryan, you would maybe disagree. Like I've talked about it too. I have talked about how I think that there's no way that Trump won't win. Like I think that Trump is definitely going to win the next election because I would love to be proven wrong. I would love it. But if you think that there is change coming and people will vote in somebody else, then shouldn't that next president be able to choose such an important position in shaping the cultural conversation of a country, right?
I mean, that's the literal precedent set by Republicans 4 years ago. That's the established norm that wasn't the established norm, but then was made the established norm by this Senate.
When they were jerks.
And
to Obama.
Then,
basically.
6 months left was too little time to consider a candidate. 6 weeks, however, is a perfectly appropriate time to confirm a candidate. And that is, some of the... That seems fragile, but that's also not the first safety net, right? Like we've talked before, you and I, about like, wow, the Supreme Court, like one person, huh?
Can make a huge difference.
This whole democratic system seems to hinge on one person right now. But that's the nth safety net that has been crashed through as far as checks and balances. There's plenty of other things that have went wrong beforehand, both highly visible and quite quiet, to get to the point that a single Supreme Court justice holds the hopes of millions on her pancreatic cancer survival diagnosis.
Is it just like I haven't looked into that? And I mean, I've been there's a lot of awesome stuff that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has done, and even beforehand, like before getting into the Senate, all the stuff but also the stuff that she passed while she was there, right? I think you know this better than me. There was like voting or no.
Well, in the Supreme Court, I mean, she's known a lot to our generation for being this amazing progressive swing vote on the Supreme Court, and for these really scathing open dissents. She was the second woman to ever sit on the U.S. Supreme Court, which is its own landmark. I am pretty confident she was the first Jewish woman, if not the first Jewish person, and she has been at the forefront of political dissent in the last 40 years. What it means to challenge an opinion, just this notoriously bold, strong, principled writer and speaker. But even before that, as a lawyer, in her long activist career, she worked on cases that became landmark in gender equality in Title X U.S. law, and that are underlying the right of women to have a bank account in their name, to do a lot of these independent things that used to be attached to a male guardianship a generation or two ago, not that long ago. That is, this one 87-year-old woman's legacy is lived at the heart of equality in politics, both spearheading as herself, taking space as a woman and insisting on her right to be there, and also literally changing the law, both as a lawyer on the ground, stirring trouble, stirring change, and then as a Supreme Court justice, probably the most famed Supreme Court justice in U.S. history. Like, arguably the best name recognition of any Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, like, I have a hard time. I think the only reason that I knew... I forget the two women as well. Like, one of them has, like, a longer name.
Yeah, there's Justice Kagan.
Yeah,
and,
Kagan. Kagan and something Berkey or Bertie or... Anyways. The only reason I knew them is because they were in a crossword puzzle once, and I was like, oh, yeah. And I'm kind of like, I probably should know these people more that are now gonna... But anyways.
I mean, we're also in Canada. Like, I know, one Supreme Court of Canada judge.
Maybe I should know any.
They dress like Santa Claus.
Oh, great.
The Supreme Court of Canada have bright red velvet fluffy robes with white fur trim.
Nice.
And just look them up sometime.
All right.
It'll make you laugh in between reading atrocities of indigenous title disputes.
That's
in
true.
between that.
That's true. Anyway, so we're all very, we all at Thunderquack podcast here are like a very, very distraught. We wish America the best in going into these uncertain times. I know that, I think no matter what you think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg or decisions of the Supreme Court, you know that she was an important part of the conversation in politics in the recent years, and that there will be a severe difference moving forward in what happens, no matter what.
Well, the immediate consequence is that, in a like global consequence way, is that any contested U.S. election is now in a very different court. Is now going to an 8-person court that's stacked 5 ways with 2 Trump appointees and 3 additional GOP.
Wow.
So remember when the Supreme Court decided between Bush-Gore, for example, when we were youngins? That's a thing the Supreme Court sometimes does.
I don't think we were young when Bush and Gore was a thing. Were we young? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we were.
Uh-oh.
I mean, yeah, we were relatively young, Amanda. We were not grown-ups then.
No. Okay.
We were precocious nerds who enjoyed social studies.
I guess. Maybe
which is why we paid attention and we're like, what's happening there? This is weird. I've never seen an election go this bad.
Yeah, okay. This bad. Oh, no. Oh, I'm getting so uncomfortable. All right.
Innocent youth.
Let's go to a brighter topic of news, which is
Marvel.
The WandaVision trailer. See the sandwich of news that you get on the Thundercrack podcast. So exciting. If people haven't seen the latest trailer, there's a lot more in it we just previously got a teaser. The only thing that's not in this trailer is a date for when it will air. And I feel like Disney Plus is the best at doing just like random dumps where they're like, surprise, here's a series. But with The Mandalorian coming up, I'm kind of like, WandaVision needs to take place either like within the next couple weeks or like not till December, because otherwise it's coming out right, because it comes out like the 30th, I think, of October. So it's like, you don't want to release 2 big series in 1 month. That just seems like not. Anyways, so speculation abounds still, but when it's
their marketing research, I trust. When it comes to the flagship tentpole series, like, I trust the binge machines to carefully place the binge in my feeding path when I am hungry. That's why it sucks all our information, right? So it can sell us the thing we want when we want it.
Exactly.
And that actually works real well with TV timing and the seasonal timing of Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Hulu, etc. I feel like they've got that down to an expertise.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So it will appear to us when we need it. Like Gandalf in the West.
I do love that. I love that idea of like looking on the bright side of the internet, always listening to you and monitoring you, is that it gives you things when you want them. And I do. We've been talking about that a lot recently, about like what's monitoring me. But the takeaway from the trailer that I thought was cool, again, as somebody who's not really a comic book nerd, to still see the homage to the comics. Like in the teaser, we got the original Scarlet Witch outfit, and in this trailer, we get the original Vision like outfit, like the cape and stuff. So it's just kind of a cool.
Yeah, that is so exciting because it's a TV show. They have so many more. There's so many more hours in the day in a TV show.
Yes.
Unlike these precious blockbuster minutes. You can putz around in a serial piece of media. You can try things and fall flat. You can be a little goofier. You can break your own rules, and you can reference the 50, 60 years of material of storytelling that, like, the deep nerdery is fabulous content for a TV show.
Nice.
I mean, Green Arrow podcast, The Flash, like there is I always found much of the charm of the CW model, right down to Riverdale as well, is the wealth of nostalgic referential attachments, the wide range that millions of people have a unique personal experience with a big chunk of this background material that they take into it, and it's a big smorgasbord of offers and references of casual viewing. Which is such a different experience than our blockbuster comic books.
Anyways, I'm excited to know when it actually comes out, though. That's, again, if somebody can find out when it comes out for me and share with me when WandaVision will be around. that'd be exciting. I'm excited for the casual viewing experience of a crazy big blockbuster franchise.
You know, I am disappointed to see Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes booted into the indefinite future.
Wow.
I must say, as excited as I am about WandaVision.
Well, that's fair. Maybe we can be excited about that news when it comes out soon. Hopefully we'll find... They didn't film it at all, did they?
Yeah, I believe their filming was largely paused. And, also, we say, oh yes, this is planned for this, but the reality of filming right now is the schedule is far more regular than it normally would be.
Right,
we see this
fair.
right here in Vancouver, right? Like many shoots are rolling out with new precautions and discovering just what that means for their speed and pace. So like a lot of our guesstimate times right now, I'm not surprised that they're giving themselves just a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I'm actually really stoked. I just saw, I follow Henry Cavill on Instagram. Because of course I do, because Henry Cavill's the best. Anyways, he took a great picture with his dog, who I also love. I don't know if you are familiar with Henry Cavill, but he has a dog named Cal, like from Superman, right? It's the best. Anyways, he was wearing a lion hat. Henry Cavill was wearing a lion hat, lying on his dog Cal, and just talking about basically he does fitness stuff, so I pay less attention to that. But apparently there's something called the Dural Challenge, and it seems like it's fundraising for something, and he's fabulous and doing awesome things. But one of the things he was specifically saying is he's like, I'm going to protect everybody on The Witcher here with me on set, and I'm going to do it remotely because you can. And I was like, oh, The Witcher's filming again? I'm so excited.
Fantastic.
So that was a great way for me to find out that they are actually filming these next seasons of The Witcher that I'm quite excited about. So
fantastic. Gotta love a majority outdoors medieval shoot
yeah.
for your safety in a pandemic.
That's fair. Yeah.
They're just always going to be in the woods.
Yeah, there you go. It's good. I like it.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Actually, I was talking with a good friend of mine who, a colleague who works as an intimacy director, and she is having the heyday of gigs right now, writing protocols for safely filming intimate scenes and romance scenes, sex scenes, love scenes, kissing scenes, what you can and can't do, what's a hard no, what's a workaround, and interestingly, that specialty that has really emerged in the last few years, the specialists who are here for intimacy and safety and performer comfort, have taken really the front charge in pandemic safety on set as well.
Cool.
Interesting that there's this cottage industry within the field and profession that has emerged around adapting to what's possible now, and that safety component.
Well, that's good. Cool. So keeping on track with the rundown that we're using here, the next part is, what are you watching, Ryan?
Keeping on comic book theme, I just rewatched Watchmen, the HBO limited series that just won itself an Emmy because, yeah, it did. Yeah,
it actually, I think, got the most nominations too out of anything. So HBO like killing it in terms of like going forward. It makes me feel like I should probably watch it.
I think you should watch it, Amanda. I think it took a cinematography award too. I think you should definitely watch it. You would be like the fourth person I have said, please watch this. Yeah, my latest rewatch was watching it with friends who were watching for the first time, which is a delightful way to rewatch a series. But I was just enthralled with the nuance and storytelling in this. It's a very there's bits of timey-wimey storytelling, there's non-chronological storytelling, and very, very effectively framed. And without spoilering things, because it's still new, it just won an Emmy. It is one of the best pieces of TV I've seen in the last few years, but it is undoubtedly the piece of television asking the most relevant social, political, and philosophical questions that I've stumbled into. The book, the original comic book series was set at the end of the Cold War, was set at the end of the 80s, and this series lives 30 years later, lives in a contemporary world that is both, it's an alternate history story and a speculative fiction story being played out over these comic books. This very comic book vibe and aesthetic. very true to comic book aesthetics and storytelling in how this television show is structured and visuals.
So
But
it's not the original series though, like the comic
no,
book, because that's new information to me. Because
yeah,
I
it's a
because I was
continuation.
so curious why the blue guy wasn't in any of the trailers, and I
Mhm.
didn't recognize the like lead character from anything that I'm aware of. So okay,
So, I believe you could richly enjoy the show Watchmen with no knowledge of the comic book series. That said, it's a fabulous piece of like seminal graphic novel work, and if nothing else, read the Wikipedia page so you get some of the neat foreshadowing and some of the reference.
is it
But
enough to have watched the movie?
yes,
Okay, cool.
yes, um, yes. With one small thing that they changed the movie ending so it was a different type of disaster. In the movie, it was some explosion or
Gotcha.
not.
Yeah, yeah.
In the comic book, it is a literal extra-dimensional giant psychic squid was dropped on New York City, and the psychic blast killed millions of people. It's so comic book. It's so
Whoa.
pastiche. But in this colors, in these colors and dot print, the show jumps right into questions of power and authority, police violence and vigilantism, racial dynamics and history and reconciliation in America. The show opens in the middle of the Greenwood massacre from Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Greenwood, the Tulsa race riots, as they are sometimes called, in 1920, I believe, approximately that timeline. A prosperous black neighborhood, a veritable Wall Street, was destroyed by white neighbors, by Klansmen, by local militia, and burnt, and hundreds were killed just for being in the wrong neighborhood in too prosperous a position. It's a real dark spot on relatively recent American history,
And
almost
that's
living
real
history.
though, right? Like, so
Yes,
that's you're talking about real stuff,
yes,
not just the comic books. Okay.
yes. So it opens in this piece of history that is the show has been widely applauded by educators, by historians for helping bring this incident into the contemporary zeitgeist in a fresh new way, um, because it takes this piece of history from the 20s to the 80s that has been comic bookized, to in the 80s challenge the existential threat of the Cold War, the authority of Ronald Reagan, this sort of tense authoritarian dynamic. Today, it is used to explore an alternate 30 years of U.S. race relations and how um, the same but different, an alternate history, how things could play out, but how the same problems would manifest, the same fundamental problems that go back to 1920 and far earlier, that are entrenched in U.S. history. It's a very American story. It's a spectacularly American story, and I mean that as the best compliment I can give. Like it's a pinnacle of telling a story that richly weaves critical U.S. history and contemporary American questions, zeitgeist conflicts, almost prophetically to a degree. This came out last year. This was made a year and a half ago, approximately, and the questions it raises about vigilantism and police violence, about racial violence, and the intersection of systematized violence, government violence, police powers, who has power, why, safety, and our hero who is a superhero cop, a black woman, Angela Abar, superhero cop, and her history living in this uh, alternate timeline where America conquered Vietnam. It tells such a rich and robust comic book story. Like it's I love the characters, and we start in a place where it's all new people who are who would belong perfectly in the world of the original comic book, but who are all more who are asking relevant contemporary questions.
Cool.
It really updates everything the original comic book did right about social commentary, about satire and critique, to contemporary questions. And it does tie back into the same world. It's clearly living in the same world and living in the consequences of a New York that was massacred 30 years ago.
Whoa.
We get to see
the
that
80s
world
was
building.
30 years ago. No.
It was. Yeah, if I dig much deeper, I'll run into spoiler territory. And this is a fabulous piece of art to just let unfold.
Yay.
The
How many episodes is it?
10.
Okay.
It's a nice, succinct, complete piece of work. The property Watchmen may continue in additional series, but the showrunner, the creator, this cast have completed this story. It's told. It's a done run.
Cool.
Whatever happens next with the property, so you can consume it, and it is meant to satisfy you in the end. It's not serial.
Nice.
The way most of our TV is.
That's good.
The other thing that also in the late to the game pieces of media that I've been watching lately is the Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, the Jim Henson Muppets on Netflix, and I'm distraught to have read just today actually that the show is for sure canceled and is not being picked back up and is not continuing.
Yeah, I heard that today too.
And I'm not remotely surprised for a lot of media analysis reasons and audience reactions. But what a glorious little piece of weird art we got. The Dark Crystal, the original Dark Crystal was this experimental, vaguely surreal piece of puppetry, of fantasy storytelling, again 80s property, and it's old, and you may have heard of it, and you may have the cult nerdery of it, but regardless of any relationship with that, what Age of Resistance is, it starts fresh in the history of this world. Again, it's connected in the world, it's building on a world, but it introduces you fully with no expectation that you're an existing audience. You don't have to see or know anything about the original, and it has this really sweet, blunt fairy tale frankness to it. It's a Muppet story. It's Muppets, but they're telling a dark, serious fantasy where people die, where beings are devoured, where horrible atrocities are unfolding, but they all have the frankness and plainness of a Muppet. Not
Cute.
being comedic.
Just being like there.
Being there. There's a spectacular voice cast. Gosh. Taron Egerton, what's his name? Jake Peralta. Andy Samberg is a voice.
Oh yeah.
It's a very star-studded cast, and a huge ensemble cast. But unlike most, unlike a Game of Thronesy place where I get confused on who's who, it's Muppets. The
Nice.
visual distinction of puppetry means I'm never confused or lost, and it takes you on this really, really sweet, serious fairy tale that at times felt to me a bit like aping children appropriate media. So like it's puppets, and we always know it's puppets.
So that
The
it sort
storytelling.
of gives it like a certain amount of like disconnect, so that you can come into it sort of in a different way. Like it's not like the like hyper realism of, say, the stuff that I watch, like The Boys, where it's just gross and viscerally gory.
Yes,
There's,
and
like,
it takes the fantasy of itself nice and serious. Like you can
cool.
really get lost in the fairy tale, the youthful fairy tale of it.
Nice.
But it's telling a very serious war story about challenging authority and life and power. And it's a very classic, like, Arthurian, Game of Thronesian power story, but it is told by gentle fairy tale puppets in this really warm, colorful world.
I love it so much that all your stuff is very like you have a meaning to all of the things that you've talked about. Anyways, thanks, Ryan. I haven't watched. Is Dark Crystal? Is it 2 seasons or is it just the one?
Season.
Just one season.
It's one
bummer.
season. Yes.
Oh.
They also tell their story.
Oh, okay.
It's clearly not quite as polished and wrapped up as Watchmen, but
it's like you can watch it without feeling distraught. As long as you go into
the season
it
tells its story.
Nice.
That's my media of the moment.
Okay, I'm still distraught that I don't know whether or not the Umbrella Academy is being renewed for another season. So I'm sitting here being like, please renew you. Anyways, my stuff, I did my homework, and I'm really sad that Mike's not on this episode because I was supposed to catch up with The Boys, and I did. So I'm very proud of myself for having caught up with The Boys.
It's on my to-watch list, so please tell me all about it.
Oh, tell you all about it. Oh, my goodness. So, I mean, The Boys, I think we chatted a little bit about it on the last podcast, so that if people haven't seen the first season, it's on Amazon Prime. There's 2, so this is the second season is now being released, not all as a big chunk, but it's being released as like weekly episodes. And then when we go through, the main conceit is that there is a superhero like Superman named Homelander, and he basically is a terrible human being. So
that's an ominous foreshadowing name.
Yeah, so he like the conceit is essentially like, what would the world be like if superheroes existed? Mm-hmm. But they also were complete narcissists and had no regard for human life.
Okay.
But their image was like bought by companies, and therefore they had to present as superheroes. So like he's still Homelander. He's still thought of as the world's greatest superhero. And so he has this front that he puts on for the world, but behind closed doors, he basically like murders a whole bunch of people. And the main conceit of like the story is Carl Urban, the guy from Star Trek. I'm sure other people know him from very different things, but anyways, he is on a rampage trying to make the world know who Homelander is, because Homelander raped his wife, and his wife has disappeared, and so it's been like 8 years or something. Like, it's like a long period of time in which he's been basically fighting, trying to find Homelander, and he the other kid that becomes sort of like a main character is somebody whose girlfriend basically was killed because she was standing a foot off the curb, and the Flash character, like the character called A-Train, ran through her, and she exploded. So and that's in the first episode, so it's not like a spoiler but it's like the conceit is that there's this kid who, I didn't realize this is Meg Ryan's son. I didn't know Meg Ryan had a son. Meg Ryan has a son with Dennis Quaid, and that kid is like the main kid of the show. Anyways, and so he joins basically this group of vigilantes, the anti-heroes that are fighting against the big heroes, and it's really interesting. It plays with itself. It's very tongue-in-cheek. The second season, the conceit is like, in the first season, there's a new superhero added to the group of the Seven, is what they're called. And she's a woman. And so she's like the second woman to be added to the team. And she winds up being actually a friend of our anti-heroes, which is kind of cool, like, as the story progresses. It's not really a spoiler. Anyways. But the second season, they've introduced a new character who is another woman. And it just does this whole great tongue-in-cheek thing where they have ad campaigns, right? Because they're part of a company, and the company is selling these superheroes, and their ad campaign is "Girls Get It Done." And so it's just this whole terrible, like, these 3 superheroes that just are so sick of like this, and the one girl that's come in, basically being like, why are you guys putting up with this, or this is all like ridiculous, and sort of live streaming, but it's sort of like they lean into it, right, a little bit, and so it's just, anyways, overall fun.
There's self-satire of.
Oh yeah,
because its own.
It's like literally what would the world be like if there were superheroes and we could make money off of them.
You would enjoy, I suspect, Amanda, the anime Tiger and Bunny.
Oh, I've heard of this before, I think, but what is Tiger and Bunny?
Let me make sure I'm recommending the right one while I describe it. It is a similar premise of monetized superheroes. You know, it's a
Ah.
Japanese telling of the framing, but it's a kind of a buddy cop comedy with frequently assumed to have significant homoerotic subtext, intended or not. Um, but it's about these two heroes who end up partnered together in the corporate sponsored hero game of hero villain battle
Oh, so
for
they're kind of
show.
like they play off of each other, like as a hero and a villain, essentially.
No, they're two heroes who are reluctantly partnered is the
Ah,
premise.
cool.
Yes.
The Boys
But
is very violent. I do just before I finish talking about The Boys, I do just need anybody that's thinking of watching it. It's not for the faint of heart. Like honestly, it's really good in terms of like deconstructing like humanity and at its worst. But it is viscerally like in the second season. I don't think this is a spoiler, but straight up, they ram a boat through a whale, and then
huh.
it's just they're just covered it like what would happen to you if you rammed through a whale. And it's basically a little bit of a breaking point for one of the characters who's just basically sitting inside this dead whale and just being like what like it's
Yep.
like a great moment. And anybody that's familiar with The Boys, even if you haven't watched this episode, the Aquaman character is interesting for many reasons. I don't know if I'm really liking his narrative in the second season, but one of the things is that he just fails spectacularly at protecting sea life. And so it's
From
just,
inside of a whale.
like it's just this fantastic thing. I will say too, actually, this is something that Andrew really likes about the series, is that The Boys, the first season of The Boys, he says it's one of the only depictions he's ever seen, and I think it's true for me as well, where there is a male who is sexually assaulted and it's not treated like a joke. Like it's a serious thing like this. And they do it in a way where the sexual assault is done through the features of the superhero. So it's not like it's an allegory for sexual assault essentially, but it's very visceral and uncomfortable. But the thing that's really interesting is that the person who is sexually assaulted had previously committed sexual assault. So the show is really this sort of dynamic on like you really get at the core of all of these, like what happens when you watch a terrible person get their comeuppance, but then you have to sit with that character for the rest of the series and see what they're going through as well. Like it's just sort of an interesting.
Right, sitting that emotional processing space,
Yeah.
more of our Jessica Jones type.
Yeah.
Question about the human healing.
Yeah. Love it.
Cool.
So nice.
Okay.
So that's The Boys.
You've nicely bumped it up my list a few points anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not fond of the Amazon Prime interface. That is 100% the reason I haven't gotten around to watching this one yet.
It appears on my Roku TV, so I can use it like any other app. So I can just watch it like regular television. And I feel like there's like it lessens a whole bunch of stuff. I actually just got Apple TV too for the same reason, where I could just literally like do it on my TV. So I can't deal with it actually in my browser, but my other TV series, I actually cannot remember if I talked about this last week. I potentially did, but basically one of the guys that we went to school with, Ryan, is a producer, and he has produced a series called Julie and the Phantoms. And then I wound up watching just sort of the first couple episodes to just be like, oh, this is cool. It's something that was created by somebody that we know or produced by somebody that we know, and it has major High School Musical vibes. And as somebody who quite enjoyed High School Musical, I actually watched all 9 episodes of the first season. So
there is a place and a time for High School
right?
Musical vibes.
And it very much was this show, and it was just really cute. It's about the conceit of Julie and the Phantoms is that there is a 90s boy band that dies, and a young girl from modern times who is having problems getting back into her singing because her mother has passed, and she forms a band with 3 ghosts And it is.
Fantastic.
It's just a fun, lighthearted. It's a kid show. Like, don't get me wrong. It's very much for that kind of a demographic, but it's cute and it's totally Vancouver is all over the place on that show. And also it's just some cool and it's Kenny Ortega too, who is very.
Excellent.
I mean, that's probably why it has High School Musical vibes, but
that could be an association, maybe.
Anyway, so those are the things that I am watching. Okay, so I will say, being having to do this on my own, I have no idea if there's still ad breaks. So if there is ad breaks in this version of Thunderquack, they would have just happened. So thank you. Thank you for listening to the ad breaks. If we don't have ad breaks anymore, that's awesome. We really are just trying to get as many people listening to the podcast as possible over at the Thunderquack Patreon page, which we did sort of chat at the beginning. So that's a great way to listen without ads, such as if you just listen to this one without ads. Also, it keeps...
Maybe you got a free sample. We're not sure.
Also, it keeps Mike around, which I'm sure people need, because I have been trying everything with the tech on this, and we have had some tech hiccups, let me tell you. And I just have to apologize, because I think that there's a bit of an echo for me, and I can't figure out what it is. But you have Ryan's beautiful voice pretty consistently, so I'll just try to let Ryan talk for the last little bit of this podcast.
At least I'm smooth.
Right, exactly. It's so beautiful. I feel like it's me trying to use my fancy microphone has messed me up, because I can only use, with great power comes great responsibility that I obviously don't know how to deal with yet. So for the final bit of the podcast, we usually do sort of a main topic, but again, we've gotten rid of the Thunderquack rundown and we don't do things that way. So instead, let's just chat a little bit about all of the things exploding in our world and relate them back to J.K. Rowling, who we've talked about many times on the podcast, and all of the malarkey that's happening with her. But one of the biggest things that's happened recently is that people have just found out the topic of her new book. And I think that is causing people to understand where all of her, as we use the words, malarkey is coming from.
Well, it's interesting, because the subject of her new book isn't transphobia. It's like a chunk of the plot, a side plot. One of the suspects is just a really horrifying transphobic stereotype. So it's not even about this. It's just obviously atrocious in a perpetuating harmful stereotypes way. I've seen some people speculate, like, did she out herself as a transphobic jerk specifically because she knew she was going to get called out about this book? Or, like, was that her attempt at damage control? Because it failed. But anyway, yeah, she's put her money where her mouth is with her work, and J.K. Rowling needs to lose her cultural cachet. She has abused it, and
I think she is. Like, there was that beautiful Barnes & Noble display the other day that was going around social media, where it's like books that you can read instead of Harry Potter, or just people like starting to recognize that.
When the next ridiculous. Fantastic Beasts movie gets canceled, then she will have, her brand will have sufficiently waned. As long as people are still making money off of her, that's an issue. And, like, I say this as a long-time Harry Potter fan. I've been to the parks, I've been to conventions, I grew up on it, I was a big old nerd. And I love that property. But we can't separate the artist from the continuing new works that both attempt to comment on contemporary social issues. In lots of her writings in Harry Potter, she does attempt to make commentary, and we can't ignore the fact that as long as she's bankable, major corporate norms will depend on her transphobic awfulness, and allow her that and give her a pass for that. And that's not appropriate behavior from a public figure. That's not an okay opinion to spew hate.
Yeah.
And letting our capitalist art system churn along and continue producing Harry Potter related things. I don't care about the measly residuals that she's getting from any given, this new Harry Potter game coming out, for example. I care about the fact that studios can see this horrible, hateful tirade, this contentious position that denies the rights of people employed by these very companies, by her publisher, by Warner Brothers, when they continue to invest and make money off of her name and her brand.
Right.
That's how brutally she is the canceled this time. She needs to be. Her brand is trash, and she made it that way, and it sucks. But there's no ethical consumption of Harry Potter anymore. There's secondhand piracy of the books. Enjoy the books for what it is. Enjoy the properties for your personal relationship with it. But new stuff's done.
Yeah.
It's supporting evil.
We've been talking a lot about this is like specifically where fan fiction comes in to play and where there's like ways to get your content in other places. And I don't know if anybody did listen. I feel like you and I have done a Thunderquack podcast way back when they were like not the like podcast that they are today, where we specifically did a whole deep dive into fan fiction. So if you're curious and want to hear more of myself and Ryan talking on the internet, there is content to consume there. I think I also joined for a Riverdale podcast once, but I didn't know what was going on. So I feel like it's maybe
once.
It wasn't.
Yeah, you were a few episodes behind.
I don't think I've ever watched full episodes of Riverdale. I do so I'm the worst person to talk about Riverdale. But we chatted a little bit on the podcast about the J.K. Rowling billboard that came out in BC, yes. So people are familiar with sort of our Vancouver-based struggles with her. So she just keeps coming up on our podcast, and I think it's just because there just keeps being new things each week, and you can't get rid of authorial intent in a lot of things. And I saw a great meme today, specifically sort of about how authors can be held accountable, or that the author who had written Jaws or something forever was sort of sad that his book led to a near extinction of and vilification of sharks who actually are not as terrible as they are portrayed in Jaws. So I just think that like the power that you have as an author is really important to recognize, and the destruction or the positive things that it can bring into the world. And I think all authors start from a place of wanting positivity, but the more that we look at what it is that JK is doing, it's just really frustrating and destructive. And
you know, she's done good things with her position and power by and large, as a, you know, from her lived experience and perspective, she's mostly done pretty good. But it turns out she holds this one abhorrent, hateful view. And it's not a misstep. She's just really, really wrong about this major social issue that trans people exist and are their gender and are not just confused autistic women.
People have been talking about RuPaul actually as well, because I feel like RuPaul is quite transphobic as well. And like just all of these people in positions of power that are fighting for certain rights at the expense of other rights. And I will say that is sort of what's going on with JK too, is that she thinks she's doing something good for female representation, and it really is just moving us in a completely incorrect direction. So there's I don't know, I don't want to beat this dead horse because I feel like we talk so much about JK, but I think really what it brings us to is just the things that move us forward and that get us passionate about. And we know here on Thunderquack we care a lot about politics, and we've been talking about American politics until the cows come home. But we have to talk about a big piece of news on our end too, is that British Columbia, the province in which Mike, myself, and Ryan live, have done something super stupid. And this morning, our premier, which I guess is the same as a governor in the States, has decided that it's a good time to call an election a year before we were supposed to have one. And so Ryan and I were texting this. It's actually how Ryan ended up on the podcast, because when Mike was like, hey, do you have anybody that can come podcast? I was like, well, me and Ryan have been yelling at each other via text message all morning, so I feel like we could perhaps talk to each other on the internet for a while as well.
God, I'm so local politics angry, Amanda.
I know.
It's, So, BC currently has the only progressive left-wing sitting government in Canada. Our Liberal federal government is roughly centrist, and our other provinces, their premiers, contemporaries to governors, are pretty much centrist or conservative at the moment. We're sort of a last bastion of Rohan. Like, way at the last legs of the reaches of man here on the West Coast. And you know what? Our progressive NDP government has been screwing up on a bunch of things. There've been a bunch of steps. I say this lovingly as someone who voted for my current MP minister, and as a longtime NDP supporter. I'm not totally partisan. I've also supported the Green Party, like you, Amanda.
Yay.
But I say this as a fan of a lot of their people. They've made some big screw-ups, governance-wise, but probably the biggest is calling a snap election 1 year before a scheduled election date in the middle of a pandemic and not recognizing that people would be upset. Now, I watched Premier Horgan's conference this morning, and he seemed taken aback that every single question was critical. He was increasingly off. Like, every single question had a critique as into it. Why now? What about this? What about that? What about this measure? What about that measure? It's a frustrating time because we don't necessarily have a more progressive option in British Columbia at the moment.
We don't have a more progressive, viable option in British Columbia.
Mm-hmm. We have a spectacular local Green Party who have several sitting members. However, with a snap election, there is no time for opposition parties to get their ducks in a row. They have 30 days to announce candidates. Now, our current government has been rolling out star candidates for the last 3 weeks and clearly been planning for several months. This is really bad for democracy.
Yeah.
Because in 30 days, now, all opposition parties have to headhunt, vet, and find, submit, and run their candidates. That's thousands and thousands of man-hours of work that have to happen at the drop of a hat. And ostensibly, the unabashed stated reason for this election is to lock down a majority government. They're
not gonna get it. And so,
I doubt it.
One of the
hubris.
Yeah, it's just, I will say that the reason why we're bringing this up on the International Thunderquack podcast, talking about British Columbia politics, is because we have been up on our high horse for many a month here, talking about
hot mess,
the chaos in the States with politics. And this was just something I did not see coming. Like, there's been murmurs of it for a little bit, and somebody in my extended social circle is like, isn't there an election coming up next month? And I was like, of course there isn't. It's next year. I know about politics. And they were talking about the snap election that they'd been hearing rumblings about. And I'm like, there's no way that would happen. And so
it seems like such a bad idea, right? Who would ever do that?
I know.
At a time when our infection numbers are rising, we're still struggling with school reopenings. There are several major government portfolios run by ministries that are stumbling and failing in crisis situations. And it will be the first election held in British Columbian history, with the exception of World War II, during a state of emergency.
Yeah, it's just, I will say the thing that's so weird about it is I don't know if Americans can do this. Can
no.
people that are sitting in power just decide to have an election? Just be
the parliamentary system has all sorts of weird wonkiness that is special to itself. An aspect I respect about the U.S. Republican structure is that fixed term limits are a major thing. Now, in the U.S., you also vote on stuff like sheriffs and judges in a lot of counties, which is a whole different can of worms. And there's plenty of electoral reform needed in the U.S. Yeah. But our electoral reform is unique and different types of confusing hot mess.
Yeah.
We on a parliamentary system, fixed election dates are more of a suggestion because the maintenance of government depends on the ongoing confidence of Parliament. And so in theory, you're always on that knife's edge. There's a constant accountability. And in practice, what often happens is we get this electoral gaming. The NDP, our relatively moderate, centrist, a little bit progressive left premier, has calculated that my numbers are good now. My numbers may not be good in 1 year's time at the scheduled election, and I want my majority to govern for this last year. That's the best way for me to govern. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that we still have to have an election next year then, too.
No, we don't.
Okay, no,
They get a 4-year
it resets.
mandate.
Yeah, it resets
Yep.
the 4 years, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. That's what I thought too.
Yep.
I don't know. It's just there's a whole bunch of ridiculousness about politics, and we wanted to sort of end this week's episode on a little bit, I guess, of a downer, but also it's like the Schadenfreude or whatever it is, the Schadenfreude, where you can just look at BC right now and just laugh. No. The one saving grace is that provinces have much less importance as states do. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the states that states are in charge of that, like, because the Republic, yeah, the Republic model, right? Versus parliamentary model. And so there's a lot of things that are like our government, like the Canadian government controls, but in this time of pandemic, one of the things that is the most significant is that our provincial governments are in charge of education. And at right now, there's just so many problems that we're going into. Like a new government trying to deal with education in the time of pandemic.
Yeah. Like, it's such a risk. They took this undertaking with the bold assumption that they will get a majority, because any other option is catastrophic.
Yeah. Terrible. And the thing is, too,
like, what hubris.
And people don't realize, too, because again, you're not from British Columbia, you don't care about local politics, but like the NDP hasn't really kept a majority ever in like it was like what it was like 20 or 30 years ago or something, like where there's any sort of sustained government.
Well, the NDP have most frequently functioned in Canadian politics as a third-party progressive alternative. In BC, we functionally have a two-party system. We have two major parties plus a small tertiary Green Party, and it mirrors the right-left split. Even though parties have different platforms in different provinces based on where they sit in the province's balance.
Yeah.
It can be a little confusing here in Canada between the federal and provincial, because they all use the same names, and there's a lot of the same people involved. But it's a mess, y'all. We got the most progressive one, and they're doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not even the biggest political crisis in Canada this week. The Mi'kmaqi fishing conflicts in Nova Scotia, in eastern Canada. There is violent confrontation happening between Canadian fishermen, fishing boats, fishing operations, and Indigenous Mi'kmaq fisheries. Settlers have been cutting their lines and destroying their traps, and holding a flotilla out on the water, like
I have
dozens
not heard
of
of this.
boats
See, Ryan is much
shooting
more
flares at Indigenous fisheries to prevent them from harvesting lobsters. And it's this. There's the Mi'kmaqi chiefs have declared a state of emergency about this. This really, really, really like baseline resource conflict between Indigenous and settler communities is happening out on the East Coast right now, and it's escalating into the petty property damage place, but also the threats of violence against Indigenous peoples place.
Wow.
And that's not even we're not even the biggest political mess at the moment.
Oh, great. I honestly, I thank you for being so in tune with the world, because you're now making me realize that I saw a meme today about fishing, like
what it was
about? And now I know what the meme was about. I just thought it was generally being upset about Indigenous fishing rights. So
was it the shirtless guy running meme?
No, it was like just a small little trolley, like with a little fish catcher being like, stop fishing, versus like a big commercial like fish, like where they grab the like huge swaths of fish and be like, it's not us that's the problem. It's like, clearly capitalism is the problem here, but
Canadian licenses control like 99% of the fisheries stock allowed, and clearly the problem is Mi'kmaq overfishing.
There you go.
And
Right.
and 99%, I believe I've seen the number 99.3%
Jeez.
put out there.
Jeez.
Yeah. And of course, the overfishing is coming from the Micmac communities.
Jeez.
Yep.
Oh,
Anyway,
they're all dumpster fires. So we're all
Welcome
in this
to our
together,
dumpster
everybody. We're all in this together. And the
we're all
best
in
we can do.
different dumpsters.
We're all in different dumpsters. The best we can
But they're
do
all on fire.
is just try to make the world a little bit better. Make sure you register to vote. I think that in-person voting in the States has started. I literally just realized that, Ryan, sort of was like, you should run again for politics this morning. And I'm kind of like, I'm not going to run again in my current district because there's a harsh incumbent from the NDP that everybody loves. He's basically the governor general of our province. Is that the right state?
Attorney
General. So
But,
the second highest. But
let's talk vulnerabilities, Amanda, off the podcast.
but also though, I've been spending a lot of time in my hometown of Penticton, who currently has a liberal sitting in that seat. Anyways, we'll talk politics after this podcast, Ryan. Much like we've talked politics on the podcast. So
Amanda's candidacy now.
Oh dear.
Again. It literally has to happen within the next week, too.
I know,
That's
it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Remember how much work it was the first time you decided to do this with months of lead up?
No.
God.
But that's the only reason why kind of now I'm like, well, it would only be 2 months of my life. Unless it became 4 years of my life. But that's a different story. Okay. We're going to be done now. If there's anything, usually when we exit the podcast, we talk a little bit about how people can find us elsewhere. I don't know if you want people to follow you on social media, but they could follow your stuff. So let us know, Ryan.
Sure. I get real loud about politics on Twitter. Ryan M. Caron. I think we follow each other.
Yeah.
That Twitter is probably the best place to find me. I have Instagram, I have Facebook, but those are much more in-joke places.
Nice. Do you have a place for Riverdale Gang stuff, too? Are you guys online? If people want to follow
we have a website, riverdalegang.com, but really we are a floating podcast off in the ether, wherever you draw your podcasts from.
Nice.
We are a watch-along critical commentary podcast of the CW television show Riverdale. We talk a lot about original Archie comics nerdism. We talk a lot about the really indulgent art niche mush that gets jammed into the CW shows, all the really wonky, experimental, ridiculous stuff. And it's a good old time.
Awesome, thanks. People that follow this podcast know that you can find me on Twitter at akonkin, AKONKIN. You can add an 86 to that for Instagram. I did not write down all of the Thunderquack things that I was supposed to. I wrote the intro. I just want everybody to just relish in the intro. Come on. I got the intro.
She nailed that.
You can give me the extra. I actually do think
I saw
that
the
Mike
text, the copy.
I think Mike has actually recorded it now. So this might be the place in which Mike adds all of that in as he normally does. So Mike, I hope you can add that after this so that people can find us on Thunderquack podcast. But otherwise, we'll be signing off. So thanks again for listening.
Nice to meet y'all.
All right. Okay, stay safe, everyone. Wash your hands and be kind to one another.
Follow the Thunderquack podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by searching the Thunderquack podcast. You can support us in 3 ways. First, by heading to the podcast service of your choice and leaving a rating and review. Second, by going to store.thunderquack.com to pick up some merch from your favorite podcasts. And last but not least, by heading to patreon.com/thunderquack to kick in with your monthly pledge of support and get cool rewards like early access, ad-free episodes, and extended episodes. The Thunderquack podcast is the official podcast of thunderquack.com. Head to thunderquack.com to discover more great podcasts.